Hi students, in my last video I showed you a little bit about gesture drawing. We did this big drawing here of this bowl of olives, loosening it up and getting accurate in terms of proportions. And today I wanted to just show you how you want to go about an individual piece of fruit or vegetable, and also we want to figure out a way to incorporate the wax, the salt, and the earth tones, as well as pure color accents. I found this little image of some onions in a burlap sack, and you can see there's some texture on the ground. I think that's a really good opportunity to use salt, and then I might put a little wax on the onions themselves because they're a little bit shiny, but I don't want to overdo it. So I might even just put the wax and the salt together in the bottom. I just don't want it to be isolated to the floor. So I might weave it into some of this. But I'm not going to do the whole thing. I just wanted to kind of show you some techniques, how to go about this. I'm going to move this over a little bit. I'm going to work on just one onion, if you can see here. I'm going to lightly, gesturally, see I've already, let's say, drawn this a few times. So let's say I feel a little more comfortable now with the subject, and I'm very lightly applying line to my drawing. Of course it'll be much larger, but this way you don't have to worry about erasing too much, and you don't have this huge heavy carbon line, so you can kind of clean it up a little as you go. But you don't want your drawing to be any darker than that. It's pretty light and simple. And you want to draw a little bit of information here about the highlight. This highlight of orange moves over here, and then there's an even brighter highlight here of where the light is hitting this. So I'm looking at shapes of value and placement in that little area. It's very light. It should be no darker than that, but I'm going to make it a little darker so you can see what I just did. So we've got the shape of this one onion, and hopefully you will have practiced drawing it enough that you either do a grid over there or you just sketched it out enough that you're getting the right size and placement of things. And of course it's always helpful to draw what's around it to figure out the proportions and the scale. So it kind of goes up structurally over here and bows out there, and flat here and there. Again, my organizational drawing is never going to stop. Now I'm looking at this cross contour movement, which goes around almost like a spinning top, and then there's this movement that goes like a beach ball around this way, and that will enable you to create the volume and the movement. And even up in here, this thing goes around. So even though you're working even lighter than this, it's very helpful to put a little bit more information as you see it. There's a nice shadow here that I'm going to capture, and there's a little shadow over here of this burlap sack that's behind it. And then there's a triangle here in between this. You can see it right here. And I want to get the angle of that properly, because that's where the next onion starts. And of course, if I were doing gesture, I would do it really loose and draw the whole thing, but assuming this is the one I started before, I would just get basic information of where it hits here. And then of course we have this movement of this really pretty, it looks like texture. So I'm going to make some cross contour lines to see how that moves. It's basically that these objects are sitting on something and it moves. So this is going to be key right here when I start painting it in, is this shape of value. And again, you don't want to draw this dark, I'm just doing it for the sake of demonstration. So this whole value in here is going to be what makes this pop out. And then you see this little piece of onion that's sort of flayed off there, and then there's a value under that that's shaped like a rectangle. And then you have this other piece of onion coming through. You've got this dark here, and then you've got this stem going off and a shadow there. Just enough information around this so that as I paint it in, it makes a little more sense. You've got a nice drapery study here with some abstract shapes in there. And then this sticks out all by itself over here, has a shadow here, and then the drapery sort of fades out over here. And then it goes a little edgy, kind of like a little coating, like a hoodie over that other onion up here that sits up here. But that's enough information. The border actually is here, so it's good to put a little more in there, drapery here. So I know where this sits. So now when you go to actually render this thing, and here's the border here, we're going to use some techniques that incorporate earth tones, pure color, wax, and salt. I talked a little bit about the foreground being a place that you could use both. And the great thing about the wax is you can use it to get cross contour. So I can actually draw the direction that this material is moving because it flays out like linear perspective. It flays out there. Remember, you got to press pretty hard with that stuff. Now, wax goes first. This would be an opportunity for me to put in some mud, which is that color we talked about from the palette that's in the corner. And you always want to use a variety of brushes, especially on this project. So I'm pulling out some flat, some round, and I've got my palette here. And here's my palette. I'm just pulling out that mud mixture right here in the corner. So, and you want to make sure your mud mixture is the right mud before you start. Remember, mine was really greenish and reddish. So I'm just going to redo my mud again, make a nice brown. And remember on the warm-up, on the one where you use the salt, we used black with the brown. And if you look at my picture, because you want to match local color, which means mixing the primaries in black and the blank paper to try to match it. We're also going to extend that and exaggerate that in parts. And we're also going to pull away from the picture and leave a lot of white. If you can see in here, it's a cool brown. So I added blue and brown and black to my tabletop here. And I'm going to put a very light application on top of the wax. With wax, if you overdo it, it's kind of hard to cover the paper. That's why I was real clear about doing lines in the direction that it moves. In case I put too much, it still matches what's there. And you see how I'm not just filling it solid? I'm actually allowing the white to show through. So this would be the border. It ends right here. And this was all foreground. Now, areas where it's lighter would be a good opportunity to use your Bounty towel if it gets too much. And look how much more beautiful of a variety you get by blotting. Then you get a value shift from light to dark, and that gives you the depth that you're looking for, always. And I'm going to just fill this in since it goes off the edge. It just looks better. Okay, so that's going off the edge. Now, and looking at the picture the whole time, I just created white where there wasn't any. And that's what I really want you guys to do, is be very conscious about where you could leave white paper, because most photographs are really filled in, and most artists on the internet, unfortunately, fill everything. Even some of the videos I attached on there, they did. The reason I put it in there is because they're nicely rendered. You'll see on there those peppers and apples. There's some nice underpainting that they did too, a little glazing. So I wanted you to see different approaches. Now, I'm feeling a little bit of reddish in this. Instead of leaving it brown, I'm going to insert some red. First by mixing it in with the brown, and then by making it a little more potent later, because I want to insert pure color. This one I'm doing a little more of a solid fill because it's further away, so the texture seems smoother. And I'm really observing light and dark. So this is a lot about realism and capturing, and matching these values, like underneath here. Better to start light. I'm going to go with a round brush because it's almost like a little highlight underneath. And remember, never use pure black. I mixed in a little brown with it. You can mix in a little red with it. And it's not an acrylic painting, so you're never going to get as dark as the picture. But I'm going to fill in this little rectangle we talked about and this little triangle we talked about. So see how I'm gradually building my composition without plunking down a lot of paint? I'm feeling a little bit of blue in this area. Generally, if you put cool colors in the back and warm in the front, it's very effective for creating depth. And see, I got a pointy brush, so now I'm doing a little more linear work in here. There's a little bit of a triangle here, little drapery study up in here, and then we've got this up here, and start adding in a little bit of the moments that I see. And I'm continuing to draw with the paint. Ultimately, with watercolor, you don't ever want to just use pencil. Like, ultimately, you want to just be able to draw well enough to just draw with your paint. That way you never have to deal with pencil lines and things like that. But I'm building a little bit of the value around, a little bit of the drapery study. What's around your fruits and vegetables is more important than the fruits and vegetables themselves. So we're going to use that as an opportunity to study that. Okay, now I want to see what I'm looking at. I want to use some salt somewhere, and I also want to bring in some pure color. This is a little bit sharp over here, so I'm going to pull that in. So you can really kind of keep fixing your drawing as you go, as long as you have light enough to play with it and not too saturated. This is here. I don't want to get too caught up in the drapery study. Okay, so I'm going to switch to a smaller flat brush and start taking a look at that orange color. This is actually a filbert brush, which is a combination of flat and round. It doesn't come to a point, and it also isn't a square, but it'll work for this. Now you see how orange those onions are? I'm going to exaggerate the orange and place them in here. And then I'm going to do a little bit of the wet and wet technique that we did on those scales and also in the wash off and the underpainting. I'm going to paint this whole onion in the back. And then while it's wet, I'm going to put in the darker values. So it's going to be a soft blend into the orange. So I'm dropping my purplish value here. And remember, this can be a little bit abstract, a little bit loose. It's to celebrate the medium, not the subject. The subject just happens to have a lot of great color. So you can see how I just rendered that entire onion. You can put this in there too, because you don't want stems to look weird. A lot of people will like put a stem on an apple or a stem on an onion. It's unnatural, so you want to put it in there while it's wet. Even if it's a pointy thing. So let's say I want to do this pointy thing. If I do it while it's wet, it still moves around. Even though it's more yellow here, I can just place this here, and I can put this dark value here because it's a little darker right there. And then it's not, it's a little bit dark still, it's an orange. But you can see how it's not as gaudy and weird as if you just put that on there afterwards. So now I'm going to build some of these values around here. And then of course I'm doing it within the wet of the onion. And then I have a little bit of cross contour line that I can capture. See what this does here. Comes over to here. So I'm still kind of drawing. As long as it's light, I'm okay. This one comes in front. And if I feel like it's too dark or I want to pull out a highlight like back here, I just press down my Bounty towel and I get a nice highlight. And even though I kind of ran into that other onion here, I can fix it by just putting that Bounty towel on there. because this actually tucks behind a little more than what I had. So you never want to get too caught up with your drawing. If it's inaccurate, fix it. So I'm looking at this. It's a little too dark for me, so I'm going to blot it again because I don't want that onion competing with my one in the front. So the one in between seems a little more yellow, and I'm going to exaggerate that yellow. And I'm going to do another wet and wet area here. Fill the whole onion. Needs a little more red. Has a little cast shadow on it before it goes into this area. And see how that just blended right here, red and a yellow back into red, without the intense edge. We don't want a lot of edge going on here. We might emphasize that later, but for now we want it to be pretty dark. I mean pretty light, and then we'll make it dark later. But in here too, you can see down here it gets darker. So you can just add that in there into the wet for your shadows. And then here into the wet for your shadows. So now I'm starting to build not only earth tones but a little bit of pure color too. And I'm starting to look at the temperature and hue of these in-between shapes, because that's the one showing down there. At any point, if it looks too dark and it's still wet, grab your bounty towel, fold it up and press really hard. I wanted to put some salt somewhere real quick so you can see. And remember, the salt has to be where you put it really, really wet when you do it. I'm also going to use an opportunity to put some blue violet in the back, just because I don't have a lot of color in this. It's a little bland. And I want you guys to explore as well as match what you see. On top of this little hoodie thing that this onion is wearing, I see some drapery here, and I'm going to be a little exaggerating with my blue. Blue makes things go further away anyway, and I'm drawing the drapery. So you get to a place where you just are comfortable and you don't need to use a pencil, because you start to trust your rendering skills, and that takes time. But I'm starting to look a little bit at the drapery, and I'm making it red and purple just because I want to. I have enough mud down there, and I might want to mix some mud into it. And then again, while it's wet and I'm capturing these values up here, I'm going to add a lot of water because it's too dark anyway. And then I'm going to get my salt and put it in there. So now the project has, we didn't see that, sorry, wax, salt, earth tones, and some accurate rendering for a good layer. But as we get going, we're going to want to start making the picture even more accurate. And that's going to involve placing in some yellows, some oranges, and I'm really stopping to look at my picture while I do this because I don't want to overdo the white, and I also don't want things to move into the wrong spot. Because even though it's very orange, it's also neutral in spots, and it blends in spots. See that wet and wet blending here, wet and wet blending here. And then in this part, the wet and wet blending goes into a shadow. So that's an opportunity to put a darker value at the bottom. So I'm going to put like a little bit of black in here. But see how it mixes in with that again? And of course it's always about timing, but I want to leave white. So I'm going to leave this one white over here, and I'm going to keep it lighter up here, and I'm exaggerating where my light values are. So I want to keep some of these highlights, even though they're a little bit strong. I can come back in and clean all this up and crisp it out later with a round brush when it's dry. So when this dries, I'll be able to put these values in, get the values around the drapes, soften up my blue and red expressive moments. So really try to explore earth tones plus pure color plus wax plus salt, and then you'll go in there later and start getting a lot of detail. But while you're getting detail, remember that you don't want to lose the white or lose the emphasis on those techniques and those colors. So I'm going to end up putting more information in here, build up these values and soften there. But that's kind of the approach I want you to take going in, so that you don't get too caught up in the actual subject. That happens a lot. I'm just going to clean some of this up because it looks a little choppy. So let's get it up to the border. And I'm weaving in strategically some blue violet just because I want to, and I feel like that color will work well with the yellow orange down there. And it'll also pop out some of these items. So over here, when I go into this area, I'll be able to get values in there. Get a better brush for that. Smaller brush. So I'll be able to come back in here and reapply these values. Remember, placement can move, but try to really capture this. I have this whole other onion here I didn't address yet. Got the drapery. And so you'll have moments in each of your choices that are more difficult, like drapery or texture of a table or overlap. Really take your time. Be gentle. If it's too dark, try to blot it before it gets too dark. And lift out the highlights. So you can see I'm starting to build. Adding a little extra color, a little wax and salt. And I could just keep going and going on this thing. As you know, I would love to. I don't want to make a forever video, but I want to show you how you can come back in and start getting some crisp edges. But you don't want to start out with crisp edges. You want to start with these light values. And again, build some of your values into the wet and wet. This is all about technique, and so you want to use the techniques that we've been exploring. Underpainting, wet and wet, even wash. And again, with the stems and things like that, you want to really not put them blocked on there. I'm still drawing, as you can see. I'm seeing things that might be off, and I'm still able to fix them because I started out light enough. So I just keep going, balancing values. And so on. I just love this stuff. I could keep going. And then of course I'm figuring out what's higher, this onion or this onion. This one's higher, so my highlight will be here. I might want to add more salt and wax. There's a nice shadow here, cross contour. If it looks weird, put a little water. You can always blot it. Not too much, but just enough in case you lose it. And when this dries, I'll put a little more paint on it and just take a picture so you can see. But that's how you want to approach your subject moving forward. Bye.